Hello and welcome everyone to LayerZero Lounge. My name is Simon Bakxys. I am the VP of Business Development at LayerZero Labs. Joined today in our Vancouver office by Brian Pellegrino, our CEO and founder. And we have a very special guest today, mikebelshe, the co-founder and CEO of BitGo. And today's topic will be WBTC as an OFT. Excited to chat about this. Mike, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the All In pod here.
That name is taken, unfortunately, I think already, but but nonetheless, you've been at this for nearly 14 years now. Talk a little bit about the history of founding BitGo and sort of the thesis behind it.
Sure. Well, look, I'm a technologist. I think a lot of the people that started in the Bitcoin space back, in that era, come from the technology field. The third, fourth time I read the Bitcoin, argument, I started to say, okay, does this really work? And I couldn't shoot any holes in it. And it led down this fascinating journey of trying to understand money better, how do our financial markets work better, and things like that. The problem of that time was really just people, losing their keys. They would lose it on their own in their individual capacity. This thing called web wallets came along, and then the web wallet would do the early rug pulls. Those happened. Companies would get hacked that really didn't know how to do appropriate OPSEC. All of those things, we wanted to solve that. So I scoured, how to do a better security thing. I found this little corner of Bitcoin called P2SH, which is a technological term for pay-to-script hash, but it's the underpinnings of what we use in order to do multi-sig. It's a very open community. I remember reaching out to the Bitcoin Wizards IRC channel. Everybody was really welcoming and supportive. I kind of described what I was thinking of. They're like, yeah, it's a great idea, go do it. And so, BitGo was born from there. But when it comes to security, and people have latched onto this, ultimately what you're doing is just eliminating single points of failure. So we've now, done that on all aspects. If you've got a single key, split it into multiple keys. If you've got a single person guarding that key or those keys, split it across multiple people, multiple companies, multiple jurisdictions. And we do all of these things today. We also employ, a newer technology called multi-party computation, or MPC. This is a cryptographic and mathematical way of taking a single key and chopping it into parts that never have to be brought together. So we use that on some blockchains. All in all, BitGo to this day remains at the technology layer committed to pulling out all the stops on whatever blockchain we interface with to make sure that we're providing the most secure solution. So on Bitcoin, of course, that's multi-sig. Actually, XRP, by the way, supports native multi-sig as well. On Ethereum, we use a combination of two things. For cold storage, we use a smart contract. Again, it's a 2 out of 3 smart contract. We pioneered that. It's been running successfully, 8 or 9 years now at this point. We also use MPC for some of the more high transactional self-custody wallets. And then a number of blockchains we use MPC because they don't support multi-sig natively. But whatever it is, we will use the best technology. So, and by the way, also on Bitcoin, you've got Schnorr signatures and signature aggregation techniques. And then, of course, some of that's over on other chains. Sometimes you'll see BLS signatures and things like that. So, all right, anyway, the origins of BitGo is all around security and keep your assets safe.
So talked about the origins of BitGo, where does WBTC come in? What does it look like, the origins of that, and sort of growth along the way? Obviously, it's grown to one of the single largest assets in the entire space with almost $10 billion of WBTC issued.
Ethereum started to have these DeFi apps that came to life. And they were getting real traction. And this is the first time where we started to have lending platforms emerge. We started to have the DeFi trading apps emerge. It was exciting stuff. And the first mechanism of kind of collateral used in those systems was wrapped Ether. Of course, still used a ton today. It's an ERC20 that wraps an Ether that's easily used in smart contracts of all types. But Ethereum doesn't carry nearly the value of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has emerged, of course, as the best store of value, the biggest store of value. About half of all crypto assets are Bitcoin if you just add up the total size of the value. So we came up with this idea, we really ought to have a wrapped Bitcoin component. And by the way, we don't deserve all the credit for it. There were a number of companies in the industry, Radar and Republic and others were all kind of asking about how do we do this, but BitGo had the custodial component of it. So really as actually a side project, just a couple of engineers worked on this, and they created Wrap Bitcoin and had a mechanism for minting and burning, and we would store the custody at BitGo. And like literally for the first year and a half, it was so small. I think it was less than $10 million for a good 18, maybe even 24 months. And we kind of wondered, all right, well, maybe that didn't work. Da, da, da. But then DeFi started to pick up with its kind of second win, and all of a sudden it just took off. So look, there'd been a number of other attempts to figure out ways to encapsulate the value of Bitcoin in something that was usable cross-chain to an Ethereum network. They all had problems. And so some of them were capital efficiency problems, like trying to tie up collateral inside of a contract itself. Others just got hacked actually pretty quickly. But Wrap Bitcoin has emerged. I guess we're somewhere in the 7 or 8 years old running at this point. It has operated without a fault. We employ a network of partners. We call them merchants that help with the distribution of it. We've got an open website called WBTC.network, so it's always audited. You can always just see exactly where the reserves are. Chainlink came along at one point, and they added a proof, an Oracle proof, where you can look and verify that the assets that you see on chain matches what it's supposed to be. So all of this has just built the ecosystem, and of course, today WBTC I think owns 80 or 85% of kind of the Bitcoin store on Ethereum. And yeah, that's the origins of Bitcoin, Wrap Bitcoin.
Can I ask, Mike? I mean, I think so many of these stories relate back to this little paper that came out in October of 2008 around Bitcoin, and there have been so many attempts around doing a variety of things around Bitcoin. You're wearing the Bitcoin logo on your hat there. Why do you think WBTC ended up being successful? There's been many that tried before. There's been many that tried, frankly, after. Is it execution? Is it because they were focused on solving the wrong problems? Is it because you had custody and maybe others didn't, although there are other custodians as well? What do you think was sort of the silver bullet there?
Well, I'll give you kind of two comments on it. I mean, first off, the reason it won is because of trust. And then, by the way, even though BitGo is a centralized custodian, we constantly want to make sure that decentralized finance works. And there's this argument, and I think it's pretty valid, that trusted third parties eventually always become a security hole. So that's true, and I think we need to continue to work to federate and decentralize, even Wrap Bitcoin. There are places to use a custodian, like I mentioned, with institutional, where you need it, but in general, we got to continue to make it more decentralized, and we will. But the reason Wrap Bitcoin took off is basically because of trust. Look, I think the generation of founders that got into digital assets back when I did were a little bit less just about like, let's make a quick buck. And it's kind of obvious because there's no quick buck to be made. But we got into it because we had a passion for like, can we change the way the financial system works? Can we change money? Can we actually make it so that our computers can trade with each other, without any intermediary? These are very kind of technological and idealistic things. And then that's carried in through our brand. Like with everything we do with security, we focus on it all the way through. We've been vetted by the largest institutions out there. We do a lot of work on it, not just at the technical level, but also, of course, at the operational level. You can have the greatest tech in the world, but if your OPSEC is terrible, you're not going to survive very long. And that's happened to a number of folks. So really it comes down to trust. And then when we built the custodian, it's been purpose-built. It's highly trusted. I'm just kind of flattered, actually, every time I go to conferences and things, just to hear such positive feedback about BitGo. I'd like to think that what I'm valued for is for the technology that we build, but you know what? The trust over time actually matters too. So anyway, that's the reason that it's succeeded.
What do you think, Brian? So Mike talked about sort of the emergence of DeFi, which I think helped WBTC become the asset that it is. You were certainly there for that, and know DeFi maybe more than most people. What do you think bringing Bitcoin to Ethereum means? What problems does it solve? What's your general perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think. So I think we look back when I I mean, actually, when I first got into crypto, there's literally only Bitcoin, basically. But then you get to like 2013, 2014 era, we had all this other stuff happening, and we had exchanges, we had all this sort of stuff spinning up around, and everything was paired against Bitcoin, right? So you didn't trade against dollars, you didn't trade against anything else. You traded asset/BTC, and you tracked how much something was worth in like the sats that it was worth, basically. And that was just how trading happened. That was how everybody sort of like thought about the world and the space. And you have these kind of crazy anomalies. I think Zcash, when it launched, like the first one sold was like 4,400 Bitcoin or something, and you had this crazy, obviously natural sort of market stuff. But that was like the basis for everything. Even if you wanted to participate in the Ethereum ICO, you donated Bitcoin. It was like 2,000-ish ETH for one BTC at the time. And so those are the basis of everything. You fast forward now, and Ethereum launches, and you have stable coins that come out, and we had stable coins like Tether was on I think XCP prior. We had stable coins start to arrive there, but DeFi and on-chain stuff really started to become this really compelling use, and you saw sort of like growth of stable coins start to ramp along with overall market and DeFi usage, and so things started to shift to not be paired against BTC or not be paired against ETH and be paired against like dollars a lot more. Because there was this normalizing factor. I think this happens with FX markets and with everything else. Like there are other pairs that exist. You can find BTC pairs on almost anything on your Binance or Coinbase or wherever else. But the dominant trading became sort of these stable coins. But if you look at global demand for Bitcoin, right? Like Bitcoin ETF is hailed as one of the, if not the most successful ETF of all time. In terms of rapid growth and inflows. Yeah, the most, yeah. In terms of rapid inflows, in terms of all of this. And so now we have, and again, this is stuff that I remember when we had the first sort of S&P 500 companies having Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And I was like, I didn't think that was going to happen for like a decade, right? And now you have Tesla, you have these other companies are like, okay, Bitcoin like on the balance sheets. And then you have ETF, and now we have like presidential candidates talking about strategic reserves and all of this. So all of this is accelerating very rapidly, and I think we're way ahead of where I thought that we would be. But if you look at global demand for Bitcoin from whether it's the ETF, whether it's demand at the smaller nation state level, so this is your El Salvador's, your Venezuela's, places like that, to now obviously the U.S. talking about it. On kind of what that might look like, which will clearly sort of set the stage for others. I think it's clear that, again, demand is growing. Demand is there in terms of like at the highest degree. And so one of the things I'm very interested in talking about is a sort of solution that we've come up with together and what that means, because like DeFi only lived on Ethereum, but now you look at where DeFi happens, like look at trading volumes on Solana, look at the layer 2 ecosystem, look at like everything else in the longer tail. And I think the ability to take Bitcoin and bring it easily, kind of low friction version into all of these ecosystems and open that up as an easier trading pair is going to be very impactful for DeFi and sort of across all ecosystem. And so, yeah, I'm excited. I don't know if you want to jump on the whiteboard now, but I'm excited to kind of talk through like existing structure and kind of what we've been working on.
Yeah, I think that's a good transition, and maybe Mike, first would be good to understand sort of where that lies today, right? So I think Brian, to your point, first step was how do we bring Bitcoin into Ethereum? That's done, but now we have hundreds of chains and millions of users and all these ecosystems, and so now the challenge is, well, how do we bring that to where all these users actually are, right? Not just Ethereum. And so
I think I'll whiteboard how I view it as existing today. And Mike, you tell me if I'm wrong in anywhere, and then we can talk about broad solution here. All right, so you have Bitcoin today, and what happens right now, my understanding is there's a custodial wallet that BitGo controls. So BTC get deposited in this wallet, and then you mint a synthetic version over to, let's say, Ethereum. And so right now, I don't remember the exact distribution across chains, but let's say it's something like, 7.5 billion that exists on Ethereum. And so this gets minted as WBTC, which brings it to this chain. And this is great. There was like established process for deposit, mint, and go through this entire flow. This is long-standing, and where some complexity got introduced is now we have all of these other chains. So I'm just gonna, I think there's 4 or 5 others. I think it's Tron, and I don't remember off the top of my head the others, but there's yeah, we'll just say chain A, B, and Tron. But now you also have WBTC that gets wrapped here and comes to this chain, and comes to this chain, and comes to this chain. And so you have additional WBTC on each of these. And this could be like 1 billion and 0.5 billion and I don't know, like $150 million. And so all this goes out in the ecosystem, which is great. This is kind of Vitalik had this post of multi-chain versus cross-chain kind of structure. And so in this case, we're multi-chain here. But the goal is I want to be able to move my WBTC in this pathway and in this pathway. And so if you think about like why, and same thing, here and everywhere else. And so when you think about each of these markets being isolated and independent, what becomes difficult are simple things like arbitrage and inventory, right? There might become a lot of demand here, and it's very difficult for market makers or any participant to basically switch inventory and take advantage of that arb. Just all markets work like this. And so what happens now today is if I want to take my WBTC from chain A here, so chain A, and I want to bring it to Ethereum, what would happen is I'm going to redeem back here through a merchant. And so there's some merchant who's going to do this for me. This has some fee associated with it. And so I pay a fee. The merchant has redeemed me back my BTC on Bitcoin. And then I can basically issue another mint from another merchant, which basically comes out and gets me my WBTC on Ethereum. How long does this process take roughly, Mike, off the top of your head?
Well, I was about to say that the whole the arrows are written correctly. The process is actually so much worse, right? So remember, everything that we do in our BitGo custody is cold storage. So the mint redeem process is not intended to be asynchronous and never was. So instead, what's going to happen if you actually want to do this is you're going to be going to the market. It's really the only feasible way to do it with wrapped Bitcoin today. Going through a full mint and burn, I mean, I don't know, you're talking a day, kind of best case, maybe 2 days, yeah.
And so if you go to market, so we checked right before this, and we checked, I forget which market, I think it was Jumper, and it was just going between, was it Ethereum and Arbitrum? Arbitrum and Optimism. So just going L2 to L2. And if you wanted to transfer 10 Bitcoin, you were paying 100 basis points of slip basically to execute that. So you're getting a 9.91 Bitcoin on the other side. Which is like a really high amount of slip. So this is, if you want to, there's this very lengthy sort of redemption process that exists today that is not intended for the purpose of rebalancing. Or you go to market, and again, you're probably looking at, even for modest size of about 10 Bitcoin, 100 basis points, which is really high. So I'm going to pull this over and then just talk about what this looks like now. And so what we've done, I think both of us were looking for like, this is a cool thing to build a solution around, and what does this actually look like, and what impact can it have? And so we still have Bitcoin, same as it has, still has a wallet here. You still mint, WBTC over to Ethereum, everything as it exists today. And so, we'll just say this is the 7.5 billion again, minted over there. And so that process of like minting into Ethereum is totally fine. And now what we have is the entire world of chains. And I'm just going to draw until my hand gets tired. But now we're going to say hundreds of chains. There's certainly more than hundreds of active chains right now. And we're basically taking wrapped Bitcoin as it is and converting it using our OFT standards. OFT is Omnichain Fungible Token, and the vision of OFT and the thing that was exciting when we first talked about it, the thing that was most exciting to me is you basically take the entire inventory of an asset, and rather than having 300 million here, 400 million there, 500 million there, and if you have inventory issues, you have third-party bridges, and you have to go out to market, and you have these high fees, and you have all of this stuff that's tied into friction of that, and you basically make it so the asset itself can move for only the price of gas. So if I want to move 10 Bitcoin, I'm going to pay effectively the cost of gas of the two chains I'm transacting. So if I'm going from Arbitrum to Optimism, this is going to be near free. And if I want to transfer 100 Bitcoin or 1,000 Bitcoin, it doesn't matter. Same exact thing, right? Everything is a generic packet because the end solution is the contract itself manages inventory, and it's really just coordinating where that inventory lives. It doesn't matter to the overall state of WBTC if there's 50 here and 150 here, or if there's 100 and 100. That's just an accounting change. And so what you want is to guarantee total supply is obviously equivalent here, and there's all of these checks that you guys have in place to do that. There's checks within the system in terms of pre-crime and other things. But what it means is that all of the WBTC across all of these ecosystems now becomes, I drew too many boxes, I'm gonna have too many arrows here, but it becomes a complete mesh, right? So it's not just there, it's everywhere in between. And so what this means is that if you think about this, and the way that I've always thought about it is, right now, if there's a lot of friction, if it's 100 basis points to move Bitcoin, 10 BTC between Arbitrum and Optimism, then nobody's going to be rebalancing any of these pairs until it gets to a spread that's over 100 Bitcoin. If you can do this for only the cost of gas, somebody is going to take an ARB that is, the cost of gas plus some very moderate premium. Somebody will take the free money. This is how markets work. And so what you're going to end up is spreads across chains will come down. You can basically have spreads that are sub-cent spreads because you can move basic unlimited size for the cost of gas. So as long as it can make enough value in closing that spread and rebalancing it across these chains, somebody is going to take it, which means spread get tighter, which means the ability to move WBTC gets more frictionless, and Bitcoin as an actual usable asset in the broader ecosystem becomes infinitely more powerful than it is today in terms of, hey, I want to have this on Solana, on Arbitrum, on Polygon, or wherever it is, right? The ability to expand now becomes, obviously, you guys can move to chains much, much, much faster. We support 83 chains today, and you can basically go to any of them overnight. But as soon as you have done that expansion and you're there, interacting between any of those chains and movements is as seamless as you can possibly. There is nothing lower than, in terms of friction, than the cost of gas. So it becomes coordination simply at the contract level with the same global guarantees. And I think this, when you talk about overall demand for Bitcoin, and when you talk about what this looks like on a broader scale and why, I mean, 10 billion is a very non-significant amount. There's clearly has been a lot of demand for WBC. But if you look at stable coins, you look at some of these others, I think we're at probably 150-ish, 130, 150 billion dollars worth of stable coins right now. Obviously, WETH, like you said, wrapped ETH gets used a lot. Bitcoin as a usable asset in the broader ecosystem now gets so much more compelling. And I think that itself is just like super exciting. Because again, if you look at the delta between and I know this is like sort of just happening now, but the difference between the Bitcoin ETF and the Ethereum ETF is like a very large delta right now. Like sure, Ethereum ETF is there and it's happening, but the flows relative to Bitcoin are not even close. I think, again, broad demand is extremely different. If you talk about assets that people are actively trying to hold and that are being used, especially as more institutional stuff comes on chain, I think there's a lot of unlocks that happen here. And so I'm very excited about kind of what that will look like and what that will enable.
Well, I think, Brian, you described it super well. And look, from our side, we've always wanted to get across to more chains. And as we started to look at what's the most efficient way to do it, we've been trying to figure out how to do this. We've been super excited to be able to partner with LayerZero, who's already got so much of this built, and now we put WBTC onto that. And as you know, traders have this phrase, right? Liquidity begets liquidity. So what's going to happen here is it's going to be much easier to get access to wrapped Bitcoin. And then, of course, some will take advantage of the arbitrage that you described. But it's really going to light up DeFi in a much stronger way across all of these other blockchains. And there's so many good blockchains out there, and they're duking it out, between Aptos and Sui, or Solana or Ethereum, et cetera. And it's hard to get these ecosystems going, especially when you've got like the non-EVM based ones, where they have to kind of rebuild the whole community in order to get started. And obviously having some good storage of collateral, and wrapped Bitcoin is that good storage, it's critical. And so this is going to light up all of that, which at the end of the day increases innovation, right? Because now we can have all of these blockchains growing much more quickly. We got the DeFi apps growing better. It's very exciting, actually, in terms of what's this going to enable across the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think super excited from our side. And like you said, we spent a bunch of time together prior to this, and what I am more aware of now and wasn't prior to starting this journey with you guys is like how much overlap on alignment there was on like the ethos side of what you guys are trying to build and how you build it. I think both of us are extremely security focused, and I think that has been just like nice going through, having a partner who like cares as deeply. Like you said, you guys are 7 to 8 years in with zero issues on wrapped Bitcoin. We're a little bit less than that at 2.5 years now, but our space has been riddled with hacks and issues, and where we are, we just care very deeply.
Yeah, as I think about it, I guess it hasn't quite been 7 or 8. It's been a little bit less than that, but I think, probably around 5. I guess we'd have to go back and look. But yeah, security is like a huge thing here, right? So every time people are deploying new apps, and in the DeFi space, a lot of it's about generating yield. To some degree, it's like, okay, where's the risk vector? What's the thing that's gonna break? And centralized custodians, there's a thing there, right? I mentioned the brand and why BitGo is kind of the stand above on that element, but you can't deny that it's not a central party. Okay, so you can move to self-custody things and DeFi, that starts to eliminate that. But then you get into smart contract risk. And of course, there's been, there's a whole pool full of, smart contract failures that have happened. There's questions about how do you manage these smart contracts? How do you upgrade these smart contracts? And there's been examples of failures kind of along each of these. So it's just so critical that when you look to deploy something like wrapped Bitcoin and take it across to these other blockchains, and it's if there were a failure on this, it's so critical to all of these apps, right? They suddenly just they fall apart. Your collateral is gone. I shouldn't laugh. I mean, it's a very serious thing in the laughing matter. So we spent a lot of time figuring out what's the way that we minimize kind of the smart contract risk and the risk that's otherwise going to be natural with kind of going across chains. And that's why, we ended up with LayerZero.
I think, Brian alluded to it. It was certainly, we talked for a long time about doing this, and there was certainly, I think, a story to tell on one of these podcasts maybe in the future of how we ended up actually coming to the decision and partnering. But would love to, I think, maybe hear from both of y'all, why does it make sense for BitGo and LayerZero to work together? Why did we end up going down this route outside of, obviously the technical aspects of it all, but maybe first starting with you, Mark.
Okay, well, in the use case, I think we've described that. I think Brian drew a great picture there. You can kind of see what we're trying to do is make it so it's fluid across chains so that it's much easier to get wrapped Bitcoin. It enables a whole bunch of new use cases around arbitrage and trading, but it also just kind of lights up DeFi on apps that need better stores of value. So that's kind of the application thing. Then the next question is like, how do you want to do it? And again, kind of back to Brian's previous picture, you can see like, look, there's some advantage to having everything kind of mapped back to cold storage, but that is a slow process, right? So then you can imagine, all right, well, we can put up an API of some sort and create a bridging technology. And anything that you're going to build there that you want to have be real time is going to have some amount of smart contract bridging risk, right? And we've seen that in the industry many times. But LayerZero focused on this problem, right? So, all right, how are those contracts built? Are they immutable contracts? You know, how much tried and true experience they have on those? What else has been riding on those? And of course, LayerZero has been doing this the longest and the biggest. So these are the factors that we were looking at for how do we get there. I think maybe a third element, but probably a far distant third thing, is, you know, how fast can you get to other chains? Of course, all the chains want support right away. I think from where we sit, you know, we're much more interested in making sure that it's safe than it's fast. But the applications only get lit up if the transfers are quick. So supporting new chains also turns out to be pretty quick. As Brian mentioned, you guys have got a tremendous support already. Yeah, look, those are the three things that fed into the decision.
When you talk about like us being able to work together, like there's very few use cases where like, listen, there's an asset that's like has $10 billion of it in production. It's one of the longest standing assets in DeFi. It's the like single most demanded asset globally, and one of the like highest demands for this type of thing. And you have the ability to basically help build a solution that's going to make this propagate into the ecosystem and reduce friction by 2 to 3 orders of magnitude in terms of like cost to do this at scale and potentially like open the door to a ton of new ecosystems. That's just like exciting to me. There's nothing more I would rather be spending my time on than building that kind of thing. And so I think for me, there's a little bit of the selfish of like, this is just an awesome thing to work on. It's fun, it's cool to build, it's going to touch a very large surface of things, and I think as a builder, there's just nothing better than that. So that to me was everything I needed. Yeah.
Well, I guess from my view, it's about innovation, right? So, there's so many different things that can be built on various decentralized technology, and it's not all going to come from one place. It's not all going to come from BitGo. It's not all going to come from LayerZero. It's going to come from the ecosystem that gets built around it. So the better we can do at building kind of these underpinnings, the infrastructure of things like Wrap Bitcoin, the more innovation that comes in at the application level. And when that innovation comes in, new use cases come in, now all of a sudden we all win. And this is how we really see like finance getting disrupted for real. So sometimes when I'm just back doing kind of more of the sales pitches on the banking side and things like that, I'll ask people, I'm like, raise your hand if you love your bank. And it's not very often that you see very many hands go up at all. I guess if there's somebody from JP Morgan, they'll probably raise their hand or something like that. But the innovation that we can bring to the space, we can provide all the banking services that exist, but they can run 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And for a lot of people that are just getting into the space, the first time you do a loan on DeFi, and you're just at your house doing whatever, and you can actually take a loan like that. I mean, it's just eye-opening. Your socks roll up and down all by themselves. I don't know, the lights flicker, like, fireworks go out. It's amazing. Anyway, I think it's all about just enabling more people to be innovative and creative, but because of money, you gotta be secure. You cannot lose this stuff.
So I think one thing that both of our companies are absolutely aligned on from an ethos perspective is security. We talk about it all the time. I think it's incredibly important to you all, Mike, at BitGo, and certainly to us at LayerZero. Would love to hear, I think, from both of you sort of why it matters and how we think about it from their respective parties, which all kind of culminates here within sort of the WBTC asset going cross-chain.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our side, probably something that resonated a lot with what Mike said was just the evolution of like, early on, what did BitGo look like? What piece of technology was it using? How it transitioned to MPC? How it transitioned into sharding, not only like a key, but like people who have access to a key and jurisdictions and like all of these things. I think how you think about security like has evolved. The protocols that people use, or their Schnorr signatures, or that all of this, like all of that evolves. I think LayerZero early on, we took like a very contrarian stance to the way that most of these protocols were being built at the time, and very unopinionated stance. It was just like, we have no opinion. We had a very strong opinion that de facto today, when we were launching a couple of years ago, was not going to be the de facto 5 to 10 years from now. But outside of that, we didn't really care what that looked like. We built the protocol in an agnostic enough way. This has evolved very heavily. Early on, we did Merkle tree validation, where we would do the entire Merkle proof directly on chain. That was very expensive. And then we went into Feather proof, which is basically like consensus around the hash of a packet. And now we have full ZK Lite clients being built. But in the protocol itself, like, we don't care. We have the ability to publish a validation library with any new technology that comes out. Any new piece of technology can be built into this validation library, and we can have any number of those validation libraries. The important concepts within LayerZero, the important guarantees is, one, every one of those libraries is immutable. We can never change them, and we can never remove them. Change them, if we could change them, then we could be malicious, and there would be this layer of sort of hidden risk or trust in there. The LayerZero Labs could upgrade this this validation library and make something malicious and forge fake messages across the network. So everyone is completely immutable. And the other thing is, if we could remove them, then there would be this avenue for censorship. And censorship resistance is something we just care like very, very deeply about. And so if I could remove all of the validation libraries within the protocol and only have one that added in layers of whatever that might look like in forms of censorship, then I could always sort of like rug existing applications or change the guarantees. And so when I think about builders building on LayerZero, I think the thing that you want to be able to provide them is the ability to reason long-term about both like liveness and security. And I think we've done it in a way that, again, each of these libraries are completely immutable while still giving ourselves the flexibility to say, hey, when the new method of ZK proof or whatever validation technology comes out, we can publish a new library, and then anybody can opt into that if they want. But it totally lives with the application. They can take it now. They can take it 2 years from now when $100 billion have flowed across that, and they've seen it used and tested in production. And they just have a guarantee that, you know, the code is law sense, that exists and will not be changed. And I think that's like a very, very important guarantee to be able to give to people, and it's important to be able to make a protocol that can provide those guarantees while still continuing to like innovate or add new features in terms of optionality for proofs moving forward.
Yeah, well, we certainly have this sign behind us for a reason on immutability, but yeah, I think that strongly aligns, I think, with how you all approach security as well, in a bit of a different way, Mike, right? But yeah, curious to hear your take.
Well, we care a lot about, you know, what's changeable, you know, inside of a contract. This hits kind of all different types of uses and accesses. Like for one, since we're just getting started, you know, what are the future things we're going to want to do with Wrap Bitcoin? You know, we don't even know, right? So having something that's upgradable helps. I mean, certainly the forks and the block wars of various eras have demonstrated that things do change. Inside of BitGo, you know, we still support the classic multi-sig that we supported from the beginning, but we also support newer models, which includes Taproot and Schnorr. We're the first wallet to put those out of anyone on the market. Inside of Wrap Bitcoin, here's a funny thing, a little bit about changeability, but it's at a different level. There's actually no freeze function inside of Wrap Bitcoin's smart contracts, which surprises people a little bit because all of the stablecoins actually have the ability to freeze money. And of course, it seems at first glance, of course you're going to have some sort of a token, and you know, it falls into the hands of a bad actor, you want to freeze it. But remember, as soon as you give someone the power to freeze, do you trust that they will always be using that freeze capability for the best of intentions or the intentions that you agree with? So this is another example of immutability. Like when you have a Wrap Bitcoin token, the smart contracts are designed and they are not changeable, and you cannot BitGo cannot, you know, take that away from you. Now we're centralized. I guess we've still got the underlying storage, so that's a fair argument still. But not being able to change the smart contract, I think, is really key. And you hear a lot of talk about like Web 2 to Web 3 and like ownership of data at Google and Facebook in Web 2 versus, you know, maybe ownership of data in Web 3. And we all lament the fact that, you know, Google and Facebook and others use that information against us. But as soon as we put our information there, we grant them the power to do whatever they want with that, right? This is served out in play. Like email, we used to all run our own email servers. Today, a lot of people use hosted. I think almost everybody uses hosted. So if it's hosted at Gmail, if someone decides they want to come and issue a subpoena for your mail, it used to be they had to come to you, and you got to hire your lawyer and defend yourself. Now they go to Google. Google doesn't care. They just give it to you. With the stablecoins, because of this freeze functionality, kind of the same thing is happening. It used to be that the government, if they want to take your cash, they have to come to you and they have to say, I want your cash, and you get to hire your lawyer and you get to defend yourself. Now, without you even knowing, they go to Circle. Circle freezes your address and you're done, right? So it defeats the purpose of decentralization. It defeats the purpose of self-custody. And there's other potentials. Maybe somebody breaks into, if Circle ever gets hacked, some bad guy could just decide to freeze, I don't know, all the people he doesn't like. Maybe that would be politically motivated. We know that some of the biggest actors are state actors out there. All right. Anyway, I've rambled a little bit. Like, immutability is really, really important across multiple levels. But then the way you deal with immutability and still are able to have forward progress, like what Brian just talked about, they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I think taking that a step further too, one of the important things as part of this partnership, and when we discussed between BitGo and LayerZero, is with the introduction of LayerZero v2, one of the special things that we implemented was the concept of distributed verified networks, right? So an ability to own the verification of messages going cross-chain from one chain to another. And so looking forward to the partnership here, BitGo running a DVN, a distributed verified network, and having the ability to sign off and attest all the cross-chain messages of the WBTC transfers is something that we're planning to implement in the future. And I think sort of having the ability to own that, to configure that, to trust BitGo as well as potentially third parties, if we so may choose, I think is something that's going to be really appreciated by the end users and the community. And again, kind of goes back to the aspect of security.
I mean, I think like Mike said, like, it's very clear with the centralized custodian, there is some level of risk. Ideally, it's minimized over time and everything. But like BitGo is the authority that people trust when they hold WBTC. That there's Bitcoin in the reserve and that there's access to it and everything. And so I think when you talk about how you design the asset movement of this across chain, like what you want is, in an ideal world, it's the exact same guarantee, right? And so if you're talking about Uniswap moving its token across chain, I want like the Uniswap governance to be the people who signed off on it. If I want WBTC moving across chain, like, yeah, if BitGo is the one with the same structure that they use to secure the current environment to be the one signing off, then that's great, right? You want to introduce as few additional layers of risk as humanly possible. And if you get to zero, where it's identical match between issuance and movement, then that's an ideal environment. So I think we've always viewed that as like the gold standard for an issued asset. And I think it'll be awesome to see in production.
Look, when it comes to running nodes and validators, BitGo's always taken the approach, we run them all ourselves. There's a number that you can hire that'll run a node for you. I know there's a bunch of wallets that use them. From our perspective, it's just like you can't do that. Participating directly in the validation process, making sure that you've got your own node is just key. Otherwise, whatever your feed is, they can lie to you, and you're vulnerable. So we've definitely run across wallets at various points in time that are not taking the technical time, I guess, to go and do that. And you just have to be like, God, I hope they don't get breached.
Absolutely. Well, certainly a very exciting partnership. We're looking forward to collaborating with you, Mike, and the BitGo team, and pushing the entire both Bitcoin and DeFi space forward, and bringing WBTC to a chain near you. So thanks for joining us today. Appreciate the time, and we'll see you all next time.
Well said. You guys are awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike.